Hello folks, Rob Dreemeyer here. Welcome to Broadway Barfly.
If you're a theater fan who loves a great cocktail, click that subscribe button because Broadway Barfly is the channel for you.
In the early 1970s, Richard O'Brien was an out-of-work actor living in London. He was a film buff. He enjoyed B horror films and Steve Reeves movies. He was a fan of 1950s rock and roll, and to keep himself occupied, he decided to write a musical homage to all of these things that he loved. Being the early 1970s with the sexual revolution in full swing, he also used his script as a way to explore sexuality and gender identity. His musical was titled They Came from Denton High, and it was about Brad and Janet, a newly engaged couple who have a flat tire in the middle of a rainstorm. So they walked to a nearby castle they passed on the road and they asked to use the telephone. The castle happens to be the home of the mad scientist Dr. Frank-N-Furter, who is a self-proclaimed sweet transvestite from Transylvania. And they've arrived on the night that he is unveiling his new creation, a Frankenstein-like monster named Rocky, though he's less of a monster and more of a muscle man with blonde hair and a tan. Brad and Janet get sucked into the goings-on at the castle that night, and there's intrigue and murder, there's a floor show, and it all ends with the maid and the butler launching the castle into outer space and using it as a vehicle to return to their home planet. Richard O'Brien showed a draft of his script to a friend and colleague, the Australian director named Jim Sharman. He got excited about directing the show, and they had the opportunity to present it at a small experimental space upstairs at London's Royal Court Theatre. The show opened in June of 1973 with a new title, The Rocky Horror Show, and it was an instant sensation. It played for 3 weeks and they immediately moved it to a larger theater where it played for 2 sold-out months. They moved it again to an even larger theater, and it reopened in November of 1973 and settled into a run of nearly 7 years. It played its final performance in London's West End in 1980. Early on in the London run, the show was seen by an American record producer named Lou Adler, and he immediately secured the rights to produce the show in the United States. He opened the Rocky Horror Show in Los Angeles at the Roxy Theater in 1974. Tim Curry, who created the role of Dr. Frank-N-Furter in London, came to the United States to recreate his role in Los Angeles, and among that American cast was an up-and-coming rock star named Meatloaf. Los Angeles loved the Rocky Horror Show, and pretty soon a film deal was made with 20th Century Fox. The show played to packed houses in Los Angeles for 9 months, and it only closed so that Tim Curry and Meatloaf could go to London to shoot the film. This also gave the producer the opportunity to lay the groundwork for a Broadway production. The film was titled The Rocky Horror Picture Show, and in addition to Tim Curry and Meatloaf, the cast featured the creator, Richard O'Brien, some members of the original London company, and Barry Bostwick and Susan Sarandon were cast as Brad and Janet. After the film wrapped its shoot in London, Tim Curry and Meatloaf came to New York to join the Broadway cast. The Rocky Horror Show opened in New York at the Belasco Theater in March of 1975, but this time the lightning did not strike again. The New York audiences and critics were not amused with the Rocky Horror Show, and it played for only 45 performances. The film was scheduled for release later that year, and it didn't fare much better. It did okay in London and Los Angeles, the 2 cities that had embraced the stage show, but that was about it. In other cities, the release was either cut short or canceled altogether. The critics also hated the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Roger Ebert gave it only 2.5 out of 5 stars, and Newsweek magazine called it tasteless, plotless, and pointless. That might have been the end of the Rocky Horror Picture Show had it not been for an executive at Fox. He realized that there were a handful of oddball films that were succeeding as midnight features, most notably John Waters' Pink Flamingos. He was able to convince distributors to add the Rocky Horror Picture Show to their roster of midnight screenings. And sure enough, in the cities that screened the Rocky Horror Picture Show at midnight, it started to attract these small groups of very faithful fans who would come and see the film week after week. One such place was New York City, where it played at the Waverly Theater in Greenwich Village. So the story goes, about 5 months into its midnight release in New York City, one young man who was a faithful fan was compelled to yell back at the screen. In the scene where Brad and Janet have their flat tire in the rain, Susan Sarandon gets out of the car and she covers her head with a newspaper, and this guy just shouted out, "Buy an umbrella, you cheap bitch." And of course he cracked the place up. Well, with that line, lightning struck again, and week after week, these faithful fans would not only yell out that line, but find other funny and witty lines to yell out and interject with the film's actual dialogue. Throughout the course of 1976, they actually created this entire audience participation counter-dialogue. Similar things were happening also in cities across the country. Pretty soon, these fans would bring props along to see the film. They would bring, for example, newspapers and squirt guns so they could just reenact the scene right there in their seat. They would attend in costume, dressed as their favorite characters, which gave way to this idea of shadow casts, where people in costume would act out the film right in front of the movie screen. Well, Rocky Horror Picture Show really was redefining what it meant to be a cult classic, and it became this cultural phenomenon. It also was something of a rite of passage for young people to express themselves. The Rocky Horror Picture Show still plays in movie theaters today as a part of its original theatrical release, making it the film with the longest theatrical release in film history. Who knew? Well, the film's popularity kept the interest in the stage show high, and over the years it's been revived in the West End and on Broadway. It was done as a live televised event with the Fox network, and it's been produced on stage literally all over the world. It's been translated into 11 different languages. So rest assured that somewhere in the world, pretty much every night, there's an audience doing the time warp again. So to celebrate the Rocky Horror Show on this week of Halloween, I have the perfect cocktail for us. We're going to be making the Corpse Reviver #2. Since we're talking about the Rocky Horror Show, which is derived from the original Frankenstein story, I thought it only fitting that we make the Corpse Reviver #2. Originally, the Corpse Reviver wasn't so much a cocktail as it was a concept. It was another name for the hair of the dog that bit you, or a hangover cure. It's what someone would have the morning after a night of some really heavy drinking. The term Corpse Reviver was first found in print in the early 1860s, and it was described as brandy mixed with bitters, though at that time you really could have called any sort of alcoholic concoction a Corpse Reviver. Some of the more popular variations of that era have just been lost to time. The Corpse Reviver cocktails, as we know them today, all stem from the 1930 Savoy cocktail book that was written by Craddock. In that book, he published a whole family of Corpse Reviver cocktails, and he differentiated them by giving them numbers. The Corpse Reviver cocktails have been popular ever since, and they enjoy these resurgences of popularity because they keep being reprinted in other books, most notably the Trader Vic's Bartender's Guide. In that book, they published also another family of Corpse Reviver cocktails, though in reality they really were pretty much just a reprint of the original 1930s versions with some ingredients substituted here or there. To make our Corpse Reviver #2, we need gin, Cointreau, Lillet Blanc, lemon juice, and absinthe. I'm really excited to be using the absinthe because this is the first cocktail we've made that calls for it. We only use a very small amount. It's just there for a little fragrance and a background flavor. People use the absinthe in this drink in different ways. Some people will add a splash to the mix and shake it up with the cocktail. Others will drizzle a little bit on top after the drink is poured. And some people do what we're going to do, which is rinse the glass with it. So we start by adding about a half a bar spoon or so of the absinthe to the glass, and we just swirl it around to rinse the sides with it. And then we set that aside and we'll mix everything else. So in our tin, we add 3/4 of an ounce of all of the other ingredients. 3/4 of an ounce of the gin, 3/4 ounce of the Cointreau, 3/4 ounce of the Lillet Blanc, 3/4 ounce of the lemon juice, and then we'll add that to our shaker of ice and give it a really good shake. We strain that into our absinthe-rinsed cocktail glass. And we're going to garnish it with a dried citrus wheel. If you saw the video I posted earlier this week, I showed you how to make some really great garnishes by dehydrating slices of citrus. So to stick with our Halloween theme with the Rocky Horror Show and the Corpse Survivor, of course we're going to garnish with a dried slice of blood orange. And there you have a Corpse Survivor number 2. Cheers.
If you enjoyed the video, why not give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends? Feel free to leave your comments and click that subscribe button because there's a lot more Broadway Barfly to come.